Hey, just so you know, my show is now available on Spotify and on Apple's podcasting platform. Links are in the description. If you want to subscribe and listen to my videos rather than hearing me, go over there. But without further ado, let's get into the video. It is hard to not notice over the past couple of years, during the middle of the Trump era, the magic shift from Philip DeFranco from this nonpartisan, I'm gonna give you both sides kind of guy and never actually give my opinion on anything controversial, to him moving significantly to the left. Now, in terms of motivation, it could be a number of things. It could be the fact that he was actually featured on the front page of an article describing the alt-right pipeline, and that really got under his skin. It could be that he just fundamentally didn't like Trump, didn't like where this country was going, and felt like he couldn't hold back his opinion anymore because he was getting too many right-wing people in his audience. It also could be due to financial gain. I mean, you can't not notice, if you've been watching his show recently, how many times he's able to get access to certain candidates that he was never interviewing before on the Democratic side, ever since he's dramatically pivoted to the Democratic Party and promoting exclusively Democratic Party causes. Whatever the reason, this isn't really the relevant portion of what we're going to be talking about today. What we're going to be talking about today is how being a moderate, a faux moderate, and never actually putting your name on anything controversial can actually shield you from criticisms of you being uninformed and a dumb idiot, because as Philip DeFranco has moved further and further to the left, he's quoting the most outrageous and insane numbers with confidence, and we're going to go through one of these just so we can show you how absurd DeFranco is. And by the way, I'm also going to reveal that he's just pushing communist propaganda without even knowing it, not counting the times that he quotes Cenk's nephew all the time on his show. This is a whole other incident, and I figured it's worth debunking, and putting Philip DeFranco's face in my thumbnail will make a lot of people see this debunking of this outrageous statistic. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored, so let's toss it to the sponsor and then bring it back over here and discuss on the other side. A new investigation has revealed that your Google search history can betray you in more ways than we thought. One of the techniques that law enforcement is using is a reverse keyword search, where essentially they can look at search terms, find out who searched them, and potentially use that to accuse and prosecute you of crimes. This is a giant invasion of privacy, and it doesn't appear like big tech is thinking about doing anything about it. This is one of the reasons why I turn on Virtual Shield before I start browsing. All the tips and tricks you might hear from YouTube videos don't hold the candle to what Virtual Shield does. They have a strict no-log VPN, so when law enforcement tries this same trick that they've been doing to people out there in the world, you will not be vulnerable because you have Virtual Shield. And right now, there's a great deal if you go to virtualshield.com/justice, my affiliate link, where you can get a 30-day free trial, plus on top of that, a 30-day money-back guarantee for any subscription you get post that. So if you think about it, it's really a 60-day free trial. Pretty awesome, pretty amazing. Secure yourself. Go to virtualshield.com/justice in order to do so. So last week or last month or last year or 10 years ago, honestly, I don't really have a good conception of time, although I'm sure it's closer to last week, it was revealed that certain celebrities were using their private jets in a ridiculous amount, thus making them have a giant carbon footprint. So people got outraged at these celebrities, namely Taylor Swift, and a lot of people in conservative media made videos based on the fact that these celebrities, these environmentalist celebrities, were such hypocrites. And those videos have good value. Lauren Chen actually made one. I'm going to recommend it. You know what? I'm going to link it in the description because Lauren Chen is an excellent person, makes great content, and has definitely been a friend to this channel, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today is Philip DeFranco's reaction to this, because during the course of him talking about this, he got into this weird statistical argument, which is not even true, and we're going to go over it, in order to defend celebrities like Taylor Swift. Without further ado, we're going to roll into the video, and you can see what I mean.
Looked at which stars had the highest emissions, and Kylie Jenner wasn't even in the top 10. Instead, you had the likes of Oprah, Kim Kardashian, Jay-Z, Floyd Mayweather, but at the number one spot, you had Taylor Swift, with Yard saying that her jet has taken a total of 170 flights since January, which is just 43 flights short from having one flight per day. Because keep in mind, there have only been 213 days so far this year. The jet spending a total of nearly 23,000 minutes in the air, roughly 16 days of flight, which makes her jet's flight emissions for the year come to 8,293.54 tons, which is over 1,000 times more than the average person's total annual emissions.
So first you have DeFranco going over the story as it was presented, which was talking talking about the conspicuous consumption of these celebrities who are typically environmentalist activists who talk about global warming all the time. A lot of them are what Kirk Wilcox calls warmongers, aka they present global warming as this apocalypse, whatever. You guys are familiar with that aspect of the story. But then DeFranco pivots to this so-called study about who are the biggest polluters in terms of global warming, and it's totally 100% false and propaganda.
Accountable. But at the same time, you had those defending her. The general gist being, this is kind of just a distraction. It's saying the real climate blame is on major corporations responsible for the majority share of global emissions.
So you can see right there what Philip DeFranco ended up putting up on screen as something to go after those attacking Taylor Swift was this idea that just 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of the carbon emissions in our atmosphere. And he says this comes from a study, and it just goes to show you all these people are trying to distract you with this individual's behavior or that individual's behavior, when in reality, we need to go after these 100 corporations. And just to let you know that Philip DeFranco really doesn't know what he's talking about, we're going to play a little bit more of him talking about these 100 corporations before I eviscerate this statistic.
And with all this, personally, I'll say I'm a little bit torn. I mean, one, sometimes I loan out my jet is such a fantastic excuse. But with this story, I can't help but feel like we're kind of just using Taylor Swift as like a scapegoat. Like, are the carbon emissions from her jet and the jets of these other celebrities egregious? Yes. But personally, I'll always be more mad that there's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that when 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. And understand, I think you can be mad about both. I feel like this is kind of an example of why I would rather be just rich rather than famous. Like, it's easy for everyone to be like, fuck Taylor Swift. But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
So DeFranco says this is why he would rather be rich than famous, because a lot of people are just targeting Taylor Swift when they're famous. But how many of those people know the 100 corporations that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions? 100 corporations responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. And at least he gives the caveat in the end there that this is a 2017 study, therefore it might have changed to now. However, that does not absolve him of producing the misinformation that was out there in the videos.
Also, those numbers may have changed. That's from a 2017 report.
Now, I want to explain quickly why this is communist propaganda or socialist propaganda, whatever you want to call it. You guys know what I mean. It's because a lot of the environmentalist movement is all about shifting responsibility to capitalism and using the climate crisis or global warming, whatever you want to call it, as a mechanism to quote-unquote dismantle capitalism. This is despite the fact that socialist regimes have terrible environmental records. This is despite the fact that China is one of the #1 carbon polluters despite being a communist regime. It's all about using this crisis as a mechanism in order to create the social and political change that these people want. That's why, to a T, most of these groups and individuals are against nuclear power. Remember, if the problem is for our energy needs, we're producing too much carbon dioxide. Nuclear energy is an energy that works today and produces no carbon dioxide, but that's not what these people are all about. Also, nuclear energy is affordable. People who have nuclear power plants pay less for electricity. Look at France's nuclear program versus Germany's solar and wind program. France spent half as much, and guess what? Their electricity bills are the lowest in Europe, and Germany, by contrast, invested heavily in solar and wind. And when I say invested, I mean the government wasted a bunch of money on solar and wind, and they pay significantly more for energy because France bet on something that worked and Germany didn't. And by the way, France's carbon emissions significantly lower than Germany. Almost all of Germany's carbon gains in recent years have been wiped out by them shutting down just 4 nuclear power plants. And by the way, their reductions in carbon dioxide were all achieved by shutting down Soviet-era coal-fired power plants from East Germany, not from anything that they did with the climate change laws or any of that nonsense. So people will say they're leading the way in climate change. It's really not the case. France is actually doing way better because they're heavily dependent on nuclear energy, which is clean and it works. But that's not the issue. The issue is this alleged 71% of carbon emissions just coming from 100 corporations. And if we only knew those 100 corporations, which Philip DeFranco totally does know.
But personally, I'll always be more mad that there's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that when 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
And we were angry at them, then maybe we'd solve the problem, which of course is capitalism, whatever. whatever. So needless to say, this is totally not true. It's not even close to true. It's embarrassing. And the whole idea that we should shift responsibility away from the consumers to put it on these corporations who I guess are producing all this carbon for no reason at all, like they're not selling it to any consumers, doesn't even make any sense on its face. But it actually gets worse when you dive into the numbers, which by the way, were debunked way back when in 2017, despite the fact that I'm sure you've seen this talking point around repeatedly. So unsurprisingly, this myth, this disinformation, this misinformation, this anti-capitalist propaganda comes from social media. And in the article we're going over, it comes from posts like this one that we're going to highlight. If every person on Earth just recycled, stopped using plastic straws, and drove an electric car, 100 corporations would still produce 70% of total emissions. Now, of course, this wasn't the origin point of this myth. The Guardian reported this study improperly back in 2017, which is what DeFranco referenced. It just caught fire on social media because a lot of people want to push anti-capitalist propaganda on social media and shift blame away from individual responsibility in order to promote collective solutions, i.e. socialist solutions. But it turns out that the study was not referring to total emissions. The study was at first attributed to industrial emissions, but this 70% number does not come from industrial emissions alone. This 70% number comes from industrial emissions that come from fossil fuel production and from cement production. So already, and I mean already, we're talking about fundamentally a completely different thing than was just regurgitated stupidly by Philip DeFranco. We're talking about specifically how the top 100 fossil fuel and cement companies produce 71% of the carbon dioxide. But even that is incredibly misleading because obviously your top fossil fuel companies are going to produce fossil fuel, but in reality, what is being attributed to these companies is largely due to consumption. And the percentage due to consumption, since remember, Philip DeFranco was talking about how there's too much focus on individuals and we need to aim our ire at these large companies, these 100 companies that just by themselves are 71% responsible for destroying the planet.
How many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
Is what matters. And it turns out the ratio of the carbon being produced in the production of fossil fuels and in the production of cement is about 12% on the industry side, 88% on the consumer side.
There's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that.
When 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions.
So what this fundamentally means is all these collectivists who want to shift the blame to corporations and away from individuals who don't want the issue to be about consumer choices and putting your money where your mouth is, use a statistic that shows that 88% of the emissions that they're talking about are down to the consumer. They are down to the choices. And in reality, during the production of fossil fuels, which by the way, produce the energy that fuels the world, kind of an important thing that always gets overlooked when we're talking about this issue, it's only 12% on the production side, which comparatively is significantly less than what you could change as a consumer. But let's roll back to Philip DeFranco talking about if only people knew those 100 corporations, what would they do? They probably stop talking about individuals. Think about those 100 corporations.
How many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
Now, because this has been debunked and it has been criticized, there have been attempts to replicate this study and skew the numbers in such a way that you get similar results. So we have another study that says about 60% of emissions can be attributed to those corporations or to 100 corporations. However, rolled into that 60% number is the emissions associated with agriculture. And by the way, one of the things that they left out, of course, is the distinction between the production side and, of course, the electricity consumption side, which means, again, a lot of this is down to the consumer. But the thing is, this is done intentionally to do scaremongering and to direct your ire at this vague, shadowy 100 corporations that are supposedly the author of your peril and disassociate your individual self from responsibility in your own life so that you can turn to the government for solutions that end up regulating the economy. Like I said, if you are concerned about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and you don't want to go back to peasanthood, you want to live in a modern industrial world, we have a solution for it. It's nuclear energy. But none of these people want to push it because what they're actually concerned with is too much freedom in the economy.
100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions.
Corporations are not these evil entities that are just trying to destroy the planet in search of this vague notion that is called profit. In reality, profits are the results of voluntary transactions that benefit both parties. When people value whatever product they're receiving more than the money that they're spending on it. So obviously, if a corporation does almost anything, it is due to the fact that they are being compelled to do so or incentivized to do so largely by consumers. Now, obviously, you can put corrupt incentives that will skew the market. The government has a lot to do with that. But fundamentally, the economy works in that companies try to serve you. So any attempt to shift responsibility for living a healthy, prosperous life and having a high standard of living away from the people who desire this and work to achieve this is absurd. And one of the reasons that they try to do this, one of the reasons that they try to misdirect from the individual is because they know that the individual is going to be impacted negatively by the changes that they're producing. And despite what people say about how they're willing to pay higher costs of gas or higher costs of this or that, or whatever, in reality, when push comes to shove, when you actually see people's revealed preference, it turns out that's not the case. It is no coincidence that when gas prices started to rise, even though most Americans would say, I'd pay a little bit more for gas in order to save the planet, Joe Biden, who was seen as responsible for the gas price rise, which by the way is a dubious notion, but we'll get into that another time in another video. The president doesn't control the gas prices with levers under the desk of the White House, although White House policy can influence gas prices. It's a complicated thing, but whatever. Point being, all these people who said that they were willing to pay higher costs for fuel all of a sudden started hating Joe Biden just because they were paying higher costs for fuel. So the idea that we would support politicians as a nation that intentionally raise the gas prices in order to fight climate change in 100 years and lower the sea level by a quarter of an inch or whatever they're promising now is absurd. It's not enough to just look at people's stated preferences and say, oh, I'm going to go based on that. You have to look at their revealed preference, and then that will actually tell you what people are willing to put up with. And by the way, the people who are pushing this 100 companies 71% myth, they're doing so because they know for a fact that they can't get one over on the American people if they tell them that their electric bills are going to double, they're going to have to pay twice as much for gasoline, and they're the ones who are going to have to bear the brunt of supposedly solving the climate crisis. And by the way, we can never have nuclear power, but you definitely got to pay higher taxes on absolutely everything, and your standard of living needs to go down in order to save Mother Gaia, Mother Earth, whatever.
But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
The people pushing this propaganda, the people twisting the statistics in this way, know for a fact that you're not into it. That's why they try to direct blame away from your lifestyle to these mythical, unnamed 100 corporations that Philip DeFranco definitely knows who they are. Just listen to him talk about how I wonder how people would react if they knew who they were, which I definitely do.
But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
Now, as far as Philip DeFranco goes, I'm not saying that he is intentionally misleading people in his audience. I just think that he's incredibly uninformed, and a lot of that uninformed nature was able to be hidden from the public when he was playing both sides and never actually signing his name to a controversial opinion. And now that he's revealed himself to be the left-winger that a lot of people suspected him of being, it's pretty funny to watch him fall on his face repeatedly, advocating for policies based on garbage statistics, because now he doesn't even have the chance to play a moderate, so he can't even research the other side or be bothered to research the other side of the issue. And by the way, this is something that anybody who actually takes a position becomes vulnerable to, and this is why on this channel, when I see a statistic that I think is a slam dunk for one of my arguments, I spend 5 times as long checking that statistic because I know this could just be confirmation bias ruling the day. Philip DeFranco hasn't learned that. He doesn't think about that because he is Dunning-Krugering his way all the way to the left and being rewarded by the mainstream and by politicians granting him access for it. But hey, those are just my thoughts. thoughts? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you buy into the 100 corporations responsible for 71% of admissions lie? Are you somebody who has been disappointed by Philip DeFranco's public pivot to the left? Or did you always know that he was a shiesty individual? All the thoughts in the comments below. If you like the video, showing by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about DeFranco lying. Till next time.